In the 13th century before Christ, in the royal palace of Ramesses, something happened that would haunt the Egyptian court for generations. Prince Khemwaset, third son of the mighty Pharaoh Ramesses II, could crush a grown man's wrist with his bare hands at the age of 12. Yet this same boy was so frail that palace servants had to help him walk to his lessons each morning. The royal physicians recorded over 40 separate incidents where the young prince displayed what they called the strength of 20 warriors, breaking furniture, injuring guards, and once demolishing an entire stone wall during what witnesses described as violent convulsions that lasted for hours. But here's what made this case truly disturbing. Between these explosive episodes, Khemwaset was weaker than most children his age, barely able to lift a clay cup without trembling. What the court astronomers, priests, and healers witnessed defied everything they understood about the human body. Their detailed papyrus records discovered in 1896 describe a medical mystery that wouldn't be understood by science for over 3,000 years. Before we continue with the story of Prince Khemwaset and the terror that gripped the most powerful dynasty in ancient history, tell me in the comments where in the world you are listening from. And don't forget to subscribe, because this case will challenge everything you think you know about the limits of human strength. The investigation into what happened to the pharaoh's son begins in the opulent halls of Ramesses, where the smell of burning incense could never quite mask the fear that permeated the royal household. The year was 1253 before Christ, and Egypt stood at the height of its imperial power. Ramesses II ruled from his magnificent capital of Ramesses in the Nile Delta, a city that stretched for miles along the riverbank, with temples that touched the sky and palaces adorned with gold from Nubia. The royal complex housed over 15,000 people, scribes, priests, servants, guards, craftsmen, and an army of officials who maintained the most sophisticated administration the ancient world had ever seen. Prince Khemwaset was born into this world of absolute luxury and divine authority. As the third son of the pharaoh, he wouldn't inherit the throne, but his future was nevertheless secure. Royal tutors taught him to read hieroglyphs and hieratic script. Temple priests instructed him in the sacred rituals that maintained cosmic order. Military commanders trained him in archery and chariot warfare. Like all royal children, Khemwaset was expected to master the arts of leadership, diplomacy, and religious ceremony that would prepare him for high office in his father's government. The palace where he spent his childhood was a marvel of ancient engineering. Massive limestone blocks formed walls decorated with painted reliefs showing Egypt's victories over foreign enemies. Gardens filled with exotic trees from Punt and lotus pools reflected light into cool chambers where the royal family escaped the delta heat. Servants fanned the air with ostrich feathers, while musicians played harps and flutes during the elaborate meals that could last for hours. But beneath this facade of divine perfection, something was deeply wrong with the young prince. Palace records meticulously kept by royal scribes on papyrus scrolls reveal that from early childhood, Khemwaset suffered from what the Egyptians called seizures of the gods. These episodes began when he was around 7 years old, shortly after he started formal education with his tutors. At first, the symptoms seemed minor. During lessons, the boy would suddenly begin blinking rapidly and making strange facial expressions. His head would jerk to one side repeatedly, and he would emit sharp, barking sounds that interrupted his teachers. The royal physicians, led by Chief Healer Amenhotep, initially attributed these behaviors to nervousness or defiance. They prescribed bitter herbal tonics made from willow bark and honey, along with prayers to Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of healing. The palace hierarchy was carefully structured around the pharaoh's divine authority. Ramesses II was considered the living embodiment of the god Horus, and his family shared in this sacred status. Any suggestion that a royal prince might be afflicted with some kind of illness or divine punishment was not just medically concerning, it was politically dangerous. If the gods were displeased with the royal family, it could undermine the entire foundation of Egyptian society. Queen Nefertari, Khemwaset's mother, became increasingly worried as her son's condition worsened. She consulted privately with temple priests, seeking explanations that wouldn't cast doubt on the royal family's divine nature. Some suggested the boy was receiving visions from the gods. Others whispered that he might be possessed by foreign demons brought back from Egypt's military campaigns in Syria and Palestine. The prince's daily routine became increasingly difficult to manage. Morning lessons in the scribal hall were frequently interrupted by his sudden outbursts. During religious ceremonies, he would begin making involuntary movements and sounds that disrupted the sacred rituals. Palace servants learned to stay at arm's length from the boy, not out of disrespect, but because his unpredictable behavior had already resulted in several minor injuries. What made Kamwaset's condition particularly puzzling was its inconsistent nature. For days or even weeks he would seem perfectly normal, displaying the intelligence and composure expected of a royal prince. He excelled at mathematics, showed talent for poetry, and demonstrated genuine interest in Egypt's religious traditions. Then, without warning, the episodes would return with increasing violence and duration. The royal physicians documented every detail of these attacks with the precision that characterized Egyptian record-keeping. Their observations, preserved on papyrus and later transcribed onto stone tablets, provide an unprecedented medical record from the ancient world. They noted that the episodes often began with the prince complaining of strange sensations, describing them as fire ants crawling under my skin or thunder inside my head. As word of the prince's condition spread through the palace, it created an atmosphere of nervous tension among the staff. Servants whispered in corridors about divine punishment or foreign curses. Guards reported strange sounds coming from the prince's quarters during the night. Even seasoned military officers, men who had fought in brutal campaigns against the Hittites, seemed unsettled by the boy's unpredictable behavior. The incident that would forever change how the royal court viewed Prince Kamwaset occurred on a sweltering afternoon during the season of Shemu, when the Nile floods had receded and the palace gardens were in full bloom. The prince, now 12 years old, was attending his regular military training session in the palace courtyard under the supervision of Commander Horemheb, a veteran officer who had served Rameses II in numerous campaigns. The training area was spacious and well-equipped, with targets for archery practice, wooden weapons for combat training, and stone blocks used to teach young nobles about siege warfare tactics. Several other royal children were present, along with the sons of high-ranking officials, who shared lessons with the prince as part of their elite education. Palace guards stood at attention along the walls, while servants waited in the shade with water and towels. Kamwaset had been performing normally throughout the morning. He had successfully completed archery exercises, hitting targets at 50 paces with impressive accuracy. His sword work, though not exceptional, showed steady improvement under Commander Horemheb's patient instruction. The boy seemed relaxed and confident, joking with his companions and showing none of the nervous tics that usually preceded his episodes. The demonstration that day involved moving heavy stone blocks, an exercise designed to teach future military leaders about logistics and the coordination required for building siege ramps. These limestone blocks, each weighing approximately 300 pounds, normally required 4 or 5 strong men working together to lift and position them. The lesson was meant to be theoretical, with Commander Horemheb explaining the principles while servants demonstrated the proper techniques. But as the afternoon heat intensified, something began to change in the young prince's behavior. Servants later reported that he started blinking rapidly and making small clicking sounds with his tongue. His shoulders began to twitch, and he started rolling his head from side to side in the repetitive pattern that palace staff had learned to recognize as a warning sign. Commander Horemheb, experienced in managing the prince's condition, immediately called for the lesson to end. He instructed the other students to move back and summoned the palace physicians who were always kept nearby during training sessions. But before anyone could react, Prince Kamwaset was seized by convulsions more violent than anything witnesses had previously observed. The boy's entire body began to shake with tremendous force. His arms flailed wildly, and his legs kicked out with such power that he knocked down 2 guards who had approached to help him. Strange, guttural sounds emerged from his throat, and his eyes rolled back until only the whites were visible. The episode lasted for what seemed like an eternity, but was probably no more than 2 or 3 minutes. When the convulsions finally subsided, something extraordinary and terrifying occurred. Prince Kamwaset, still appearing dazed and confused, walked unsteadily toward one of the 300-pound stone blocks. Before anyone could stop him, he grasped the massive limestone with both hands and, with a sound of grinding stone and straining muscles that echoed across the courtyard, lifted it above his head. The silence that followed was absolute. Commander Horemheb, a man who had witnessed the brutal realities of ancient warfare, later wrote that nothing in his military experience had prepared him for what he saw that afternoon. The prince, a boy so frail that he sometimes needed help climbing stairs, held a stone block that would challenge a team of grown men. His thin arms trembled with the effort, but he maintained his grip for nearly 30 seconds before the stone crashed to the ground, creating a crack in the courtyard pavement that remained visible for decades. But the demonstration of impossible strength was only the beginning. As palace guards and servants watched in horror, the prince began to move through the training area like a force of nature. He overturned wooden training equipment with casual sweeps of his arms. He grabbed a bronze sword and bent it into a twisted shape with his bare hands. When a guard captain tried to restrain him, Camwaset seized the man's wrist and squeezed until the sound of breaking bones could be heard throughout the courtyard. The episode continued for nearly an hour. During this time, the prince displayed strength that defied rational explanation, but his actions weren't directed or purposeful. He seemed to be in a trance-like state, unaware of his surroundings and unable to respond to commands or pleas from those around him. His movements were jerky and uncontrolled, as if his body were being manipulated by some external force. Royal physicians who arrived during the episode documented every detail with professional detachment despite their obvious fear. They noted that the prince's pulse was racing, his skin was flushed and burning hot, and his breathing was rapid and irregular. Foam appeared at the corners of his mouth, and his muscles remained rigid, even between the explosive displays of strength. When Prince Camwaset finally collapsed, he fell into a deep sleep that lasted for 2 full days. During this time, he returned to his normal physical state, weak, exhausted, and completely unable to remember what had occurred. When shown the damaged equipment and broken stones from his episode, he stared in confusion and denied any involvement in the destruction. The incident in the training courtyard marked a turning point in how the royal court dealt with the prince's condition. What had previously been dismissed as childhood illness or divine visions could no longer be ignored or explained away. Word of the impossible demonstration of strength spread throughout the palace, despite efforts to maintain secrecy, and soon rumors were circulating throughout the city of Pi-Ramesses about the pharaoh's son who possessed the power of the gods. In the weeks following the training courtyard incident, the royal palace of Pi-Ramesses became a place where fear and fascination walked hand in hand through the painted corridors. Commander Horemheb's official report to Pharaoh Ramesses II was carefully worded to avoid suggesting divine displeasure, but the facts remained undeniable. The prince had demonstrated physical capabilities that exceeded human limitations during what the court physicians were now calling episodes of sacred possession. The pharaoh's reaction to news of his son's condition revealed the delicate balance between parental concern and political necessity that governed royal decision-making. In private consultations with Queen Nefertari, Ramesses expressed genuine worry about Camwaset's health and future, but in official discussions with court advisors, the emphasis shifted to managing public perception and maintaining the dynasty's divine authority. Palace scribes were instructed to record the incident in neutral terms that could be interpreted as evidence of the god's favor rather than signs of illness or curse. The phrase manifestation of divine strength appeared repeatedly in official documents, while more disturbing details about the prince's lack of control or awareness during episodes were omitted from formal records. This careful editing of historical accounts would later make it difficult for modern researchers to fully understand what actually happened to Prince Camwaset. The immediate practical consequences of the episode were severe. The prince's military training was suspended indefinitely, and his movements within the palace became increasingly restricted. Royal guards were instructed to maintain constant surveillance, not to protect the prince from external threats, but to prevent him from potentially harming palace staff during future episodes. Special chambers were prepared with thick walls and minimal furnishings where Camwaset could be safely confined if his condition worsened. Chief healer Amenhotep assembled a team of the most experienced physicians in Egypt to study the prince's affliction. These medical experts came from temples throughout the kingdom, bringing with them centuries of accumulated knowledge about human anatomy, herbal remedies, and spiritual healing practices. Their collective expertise represented the pinnacle of ancient medical understanding, yet they found themselves completely baffled by symptoms that seemed to contradict everything they believed about how the human body functioned. The physicians' detailed observations, preserved on papyrus scrolls that survived in the dry climate of Egypt, provide remarkable insight into ancient medical thinking. They noted that the prince's episodes followed no predictable pattern related to diet, sleep, weather, or lunar cycles. Treatments that seemed effective one day would fail completely the next. Herbal preparations that calmed other patients had no effect on Khemwaset, while some remedies appeared to make his condition worse. Most puzzling to the ancient healers was the dramatic transformation in the prince's physical capabilities during episodes. Between attacks, medical examinations revealed a boy with normal muscle development, slightly below average strength for his age, and generally good health apart from his neurological symptoms. But during episodes, the same muscles that struggled to lift everyday objects could generate force that damaged stone and metal. The physicians developed several theories to explain this phenomenon, each reflecting the medical and religious understanding of 13th century before Christ Egypt. Some suggested that during episodes, the prince's ka, his spiritual double, was temporarily replaced by the ka of a powerful deity. Others proposed that foreign demons, brought back from Egypt's military campaigns in distant lands, were periodically possessing the boy's body. A third group argued that the prince was experiencing prophetic visions so intense that they temporarily granted him superhuman abilities. Religious authorities became deeply involved in analyzing the prince's condition from a spiritual perspective. High priest Bakankhons of the Amun temple conducted extensive consultations with other senior clergy throughout Egypt, seeking precedents in religious texts and temple archives. They found scattered references to individuals who had demonstrated unusual strength during religious ecstasy, but nothing that matched the violent and uncontrolled nature of Khemwaset's episodes. The priest's investigation led them to explore possibilities that made the royal family deeply uncomfortable. If the prince's condition represented divine punishment for some unknown transgression, it could indicate that the gods were withdrawing their favor from Ramesses II's dynasty. This interpretation had potentially catastrophic implications for Egyptian society, which depended on the belief that the pharaoh maintained cosmic balance through his divine nature. Public awareness of the prince's condition grew despite official efforts at secrecy. Palace servants, many of whom had witnessed episodes firsthand, spread stories throughout Ramesses about the pharaoh's son who could break stone with his hands but needed help walking upstairs. These accounts became increasingly exaggerated as they passed from person to person, transforming medical symptoms into supernatural legends. Market vendors in the city began selling amulets, claiming to provide protection from the strength curse that allegedly afflicted the royal family. Temple priests found themselves fielding questions from worried citizens about whether similar conditions might strike their own children. Foreign diplomats reported back to their home countries about disturbing rumors concerning the Egyptian royal succession, potentially affecting international relations and trade agreements. The psychological impact on Prince Khemwaset himself was profound and heartbreaking. Palace tutors noted that the boy became increasingly withdrawn and anxious as he grew older. He developed an intense fear of his own body, never knowing when it might betray him with another violent episode. Sleep became difficult because he worried about what might happen if he had an episode during the night when guards were less alert. Perhaps most tragically, the prince began to isolate himself from other children and palace staff, not out of arrogance, but from genuine concern about accidentally injuring someone during an episode. His natural intelligence and curiosity remained intact, but his opportunities for normal social development were severely limited by the unpredictable nature of his condition. The royal family's attempts to find a cure or explanation for Khemwaset's affliction would eventually extend far beyond Egypt's borders, involving diplomatic missions to foreign kingdoms and consultation with medical experts from distant lands. But as months passed without improvement, a darker question began to emerge in palace discussions. What would happen to the succession if other royal children began displaying similar symptoms? As Prince Khemwaset entered his 13th year, the frequency and intensity of his episodes began to increase in ways that alarmed even the most experienced palace physicians. What had started as occasional outbursts during childhood had evolved into a pattern that seemed to follow its own mysterious logic, striking without warning, but leaving behind clues that suggested some underlying mechanism that ancient medical knowledge couldn't comprehend. Chief healer Amenhotep had begun maintaining what he called the Prince's Scroll, a detailed record of every episode that included information about timing, duration, preceding events, weather conditions, the prince's diet, his emotional state, and the specific manifestations of abnormal strength. This systematic approach to medical observation was revolutionary for its time, representing one of the earliest examples of what modern medicine would recognize as clinical documentation. The patterns that emerged from this careful record-keeping were both fascinating and disturbing. Episodes seemed to occur more frequently during periods of emotional stress, such as important state ceremonies or family gatherings where the prince felt pressure to perform normally. They also appeared to be triggered by certain physical stimuli, bright lights, sudden loud noises, or even specific scents like the myrrh incense burned during religious rituals. But perhaps most intriguingly, the episodes were preceded by what the prince himself described as warning signs that lasted anywhere from a few minutes to several hours. During these prodromal periods, Khaemwaset would experience what he called lightning in my muscles and voices that speak in numbers. His vision would become unusually sharp, and he could hear conversations taking place in distant parts of the palace with extraordinary clarity. These preliminary symptoms puzzled the physicians because they suggested that the prince retained some awareness and memory of what preceded his episodes, even though he had no recollection of the violent displays of strength that followed. This selective amnesia became a crucial clue for modern medical understanding, though it would remain inexplicable to ancient healers. The investigation into possible causes led Chief Healer Amenhotep to explore connections with the prince's ancestry that had never been considered relevant to medical diagnosis. Through careful examination of royal genealogical records, he discovered that several of Khaemwaset's relatives, both on his father's and mother's sides, had displayed what ancient documents described as sacred madness, or divine fits. Prince Khaemwaset's great-grandfather, Seti I, had reportedly experienced similar episodes during his youth, though these had been interpreted as signs of divine favor and carefully concealed from public knowledge. Queen Nefertari's brother had died young after suffering from what family records described as convulsions of the gods that left him unable to speak or walk normally. Even Rameses II himself had experienced brief episodes of uncontrollable trembling during his early reign, though these had been successfully managed through careful scheduling and palace protocol. This familial pattern suggested to Amenhotep that the prince's condition might be what he termed blood inheritance, an ancient concept that roughly corresponded to modern understanding of genetic disorders. However, without knowledge of genetics or neurology, the physicians could only observe patterns without understanding the underlying mechanisms that produced them. The search for treatment options led to increasingly desperate measures. Royal agents were dispatched to foreign courts with instructions to locate healers, magicians, or physicians who might have encountered similar conditions. These diplomatic missions extended Egypt's intelligence network throughout the ancient world, from the Hittite Empire in Anatolia to the growing Assyrian kingdom in Mesopotamia. A Babylonian astronomer-physician named Nabu-Rimanu arrived in Pi-Ramesses claiming expertise in star sickness, conditions allegedly caused by celestial influences during birth. His treatments involved complex calculations based on planetary positions and administered at precisely timed intervals. For several weeks, these interventions appeared to reduce the frequency of the prince's episodes, leading to cautious optimism in the royal court. However, when Prince Khaemwaset experienced his most severe episode to date during a treatment session, Nabu-Rimanu fled the palace in terror, abandoning his astronomical instruments and refusing payment for his services. Palace guards later found him at the docks, frantically booking passage on the first available ship back to Babylon, muttering about demons that wear the faces of gods. The failed Babylonian treatment marked a turning point in the royal family's approach to managing the prince's condition. Queen Nefertari, previously hopeful that foreign expertise might provide solutions unavailable in Egypt, became convinced that divine intervention was the only remaining option. She ordered the construction of a private chapel dedicated to Sekhmet, the lioness goddess associated with both disease and healing, where daily offerings and prayers were made for her son's recovery. The chapel construction revealed another disturbing development in the prince's condition. During one of his episodes, Khaemwaset had somehow entered the construction site and single-handedly moved several massive stone blocks that were intended for the temple foundation. When workers arrived the following morning, They found the blocks arranged in a pattern that made no architectural sense, but created a perfect geometric design when viewed from above. This incident suggested that during his episodes, the prince might retain more consciousness and purpose than previously believed. The geometric arrangement indicated planning and spatial awareness that contradicted the assumption that he was simply experiencing uncontrolled convulsions. Chief healer Amenhotep began to wonder if the episodes might involve some form of altered consciousness rather than complete loss of awareness. To test this theory, palace staff began leaving various objects near the prince during episodes to observe how he interacted with them. They discovered that while Kamwasit would destroy furniture and training equipment with apparently random violence, he consistently avoided damaging items that held personal or religious significance. Sacred amulets, family portraits, and gifts from loved ones remained untouched, even when placed directly in his path during episodes. This selective behavior pattern deepened the mystery surrounding the prince's condition. If he could distinguish between significant and insignificant objects during episodes, it suggested that some level of cognitive function remained intact even during the most violent displays of abnormal strength. But this raised uncomfortable questions about responsibility and control that had serious implications for the prince's future role in Egyptian society. The most disturbing discovery came when analyzing the specific types of strength the prince displayed during episodes. Palace engineers, called in to assess damage from various incidents, determined that the force generated exceeded what should be possible given the prince's muscle mass and bone structure. More troubling still, medical examinations after episodes showed no signs of the muscle strain, joint damage, or exhaustion that should result from such extreme physical exertion. The summer of Kamwaset's 14th year brought a development that would transform the royal court's understanding of his condition from a private medical concern into a potential threat to the stability of the Egyptian kingdom. During the festival of Opet, the most important religious celebration of the year, an episode occurred in front of hundreds of witnesses that made concealment impossible and raised questions about the divine nature of royal authority itself. The festival of Opet was a month-long celebration during which the sacred statue of Amun-Ra was transported from Karnak to Luxor in a magnificent procession that demonstrated the pharaoh's role as chief priest and divine intermediary. Ramesses II had planned to use this year's festival to publicly introduce his sons to the Egyptian people as future leaders of the kingdom, a ceremony that would strengthen the dynasty's legitimacy and prepare the succession for the next generation. Prince Kamwaset had been symptom-free for nearly 6 weeks leading up to the festival, the longest period of stability he had experienced in over a year. Palace physicians cautiously optimized that his condition might be entering a phase of natural remission, while Queen Nefertari attributed the improvement to her daily prayers and offerings at the Sekhmet chapel. The royal family decided to proceed with plans to include the prince in the public ceremonies, though with discreet security precautions in place. The processional route from Karnak to Luxor stretched for nearly 2 miles along the Nile's east bank, lined with thousands of spectators who had traveled from throughout Egypt to witness the sacred pageant. Temporary platforms had been constructed to provide elevated viewing areas for nobles and foreign dignitaries, while common citizens filled the streets in a carefully managed but enthusiastic crowd. Prince Kamwaset rode in the royal chariot alongside his father and brothers, wearing the gold and lapis lazuli regalia that identified him as a member of the divine family. Contemporary accounts describe him as appearing calm and dignified, executing the ritual gestures and responses with the precision expected of royal training. For the first hour of the procession, everything proceeded according to ancient protocol. The trigger for what followed was later identified as a combination of factors that created perfect conditions for one of the prince's episodes. The intense heat of midday sun reflected off limestone buildings and metal ceremonial objects created a blazing environment that pushed human endurance to its limits. The constant noise of crowd cheering, musical instruments, and priestly chanting provided overwhelming sensory stimulation. Most significantly, the burning of massive quantities of incense created clouds of aromatic smoke that seemed to particularly affect the prince's neurological system. Palace observers who knew the warning signs noticed the initial symptoms: rapid blinking, shoulder twitches, and the subtle head movements that typically preceded major episodes. Chief healer Amenhotep, positioned strategically along the route, signaled to royal guards that intervention might be necessary. But before any action could be taken, the prince was seized by convulsions more violent and public than anything previously recorded. The royal chariot, pulled by 4 magnificent horses trained for ceremonial duty, became a scene of chaos as Prince Kamwaset began thrashing with tremendous force. His flailing arms struck the chariot's golden sides with such power that the metal framework began to bend and crack. The horses, startled by the violent movement and strange sounds coming from their passengers, reared and struggled against their harnesses. Pharaoh Ramesses II, demonstrating the presence of mind that had made him one of history's greatest rulers, immediately ordered the procession to halt while royal guards surrounded the chariot to shield the scene from public view. But thousands of spectators had already witnessed the beginning of the episode, and word spread throughout the crowd faster than officials could control it. What happened next would be discussed in whispers throughout Egypt for generations. Prince Kamwaset, in the grip of his most severe episode to date, somehow managed to tear apart sections of the golden chariot with his bare hands. The sound of bending metal and splintering wood echoed across the ceremonial route as the prince destroyed the vehicle that had taken skilled craftsmen months to construct. But the destruction of royal property, shocking as it was, paled in comparison to what witnesses observed about the prince's physical transformation during the episode. Multiple independent accounts describe his muscles as appearing to swell and harden during the convulsions, his face flushing to an almost purple color, and his entire body radiating heat that could be felt by people standing several feet away. The episode lasted nearly 20 minutes, an eternity in the context of a public religious ceremony with thousands of witnesses. Palace guards formed a protective circle around the damaged chariot, but they couldn't prevent curious spectators from climbing onto nearby buildings and platforms to get better views of what was happening. Foreign diplomats, visiting nobles, and high-ranking priests all witnessed the impossible display of strength that defied rational explanation. When Prince Kamwaset finally collapsed into the exhausted sleep that typically followed his episodes, the immediate priority became damage control for what represented the most serious threat to royal authority in decades. The festival of Opet was suspended indefinitely, an unprecedented decision that sent shockwaves throughout Egyptian religious and political circles. Official explanations blamed divine visions and sacred possession, but educated observers understood that something far more disturbing had occurred. The aftermath of the public episode created ripple effects throughout Egyptian society that extended far beyond the royal court. Temple priests found themselves struggling to explain how a member of the divine royal family could display symptoms that resembled demonic possession more than godly favor. Foreign ambassadors dispatched urgent reports to their home kingdoms describing potential instability in Egypt's ruling dynasty. Most critically for the royal family's long-term survival, questions began to emerge about whether Prince Kamwaset's condition might be contagious or hereditary. If other members of the royal family were susceptible to similar afflictions, it could indicate fundamental problems with the dynasty's divine legitimacy. Palace officials noted increased scrutiny of the pharaoh's other children, with court observers watching for any signs of unusual behavior or neurological symptoms. The prince himself, when he awakened 2 days after the episode with no memory of what had occurred, was devastated to learn about the public nature of his latest attack. The psychological burden of knowing that his condition had been witnessed by thousands of his future subjects created a new level of anxiety that seemed to make subsequent episodes more frequent and severe. Chief healer Amenhotep's medical records from this period reveal growing desperation in the search for effective treatments. The failure of conventional medicine to provide relief, combined with the political necessity of finding a solution, led to increasingly experimental approaches that pushed the boundaries of ancient medical ethics and practice. The revelation that would finally explain Prince Kamwaset's mysterious condition came through an unlikely source, a foreign slave named Marcus, captured during one of Egypt's military campaigns in Syria, who possessed medical knowledge that would have been considered revolutionary, even by modern standards. Marcus had served as a battlefield surgeon in the Roman territories, where he had developed techniques for treating head injuries sustained by gladiators and soldiers that gave him unique insights into the relationship between brain trauma and physical behavior. Marcus came to the attention of palace physicians not through official channels, but because he had successfully treated several Egyptian soldiers for symptoms that bore striking similarities to Prince Kamwaset's condition. These men, veterans of brutal campaigns against the Sea Peoples, had sustained head injuries that left them prone to violent convulsions and episodes of abnormal strength during what Marcus termed brainstorms. The Syrian surgeon's approach to medical investigation differed radically from Egyptian practice. While Egyptian physicians focused on spiritual causes and herbal remedies, Marcus conducted detailed physical examinations that included careful palpation of the skull, observation of eye movements, and tests of muscular coordination that provided clues about neurological function. His methods were crude by modern standards, but represented a significant advance in understanding brain-related disorders. When Chief Healer Amenhotep reluctantly agreed to let Marcus examine Prince Kamwaset, the foreign physician immediately identified several crucial details that had been overlooked by conventional medical approaches. During one of the prince's prodromal periods, when warning symptoms were present but the full episode had not yet begun, Marcus observed rapid rhythmic eye movements that suggested what he called electrical storms in the brain tissue. More significantly, Marcus discovered that gentle pressure applied to specific areas of the prince's skull could sometimes prevent mild episodes from escalating into full convulsions. This technique, which he had developed while treating head-injured soldiers, indicated that the condition originated from specific brain regions rather than general spiritual or humoral imbalances, as Egyptian medicine suggested. The breakthrough came when Marcus convinced palace officials to allow him to observe Prince Kamwaset during a complete episode while taking detailed notes about the progression of symptoms. This request was unprecedented and controversial, as it meant allowing a foreign slave to witness the prince's most vulnerable moments, but the royal family's desperation overcame their concerns about protocol and security. During the observed episode, Marcus made discoveries that revolutionized understanding of the prince's condition. He noted that the abnormal strength manifested in a specific pattern, first affecting the facial muscles, then spreading to the arms and torso, and finally involving the legs. This sequential progression suggested that different brain areas were being affected in a predictable order, rather than the random divine possession that Egyptian physicians had assumed. Most importantly, Marcus observed that during episodes, the prince's muscles contracted with such force that they could generate strength far exceeding normal human capacity, but at tremendous cost to his body. The surgical knowledge gained from treating gladiator injuries allowed Marcus to recognize that this type of muscular hypercontraction, while impressive, was actually damaging the prince's joints and connective tissues in ways that would cause serious problems as he aged. The foreign physician's examination also revealed evidence of previous head trauma that had been missed by Egyptian medical procedures. Through careful palpation of the prince's skull, Marcus detected a slight depression in the bone near the left temple, consistent with a significant impact that had occurred during early childhood. When questioned about possible injuries, palace records revealed that Kamwaset had suffered a fall from his horse at age 6, an incident that had been dismissed as minor because he had shown no immediate serious effects. Marcus explained to the astonished Egyptian court that brain injuries could cause delayed symptoms that appeared months or years after the original trauma. In the prince's case, the childhood head injury had likely damaged specific brain areas responsible for controlling muscular activity and preventing seizures. The condition was not divine punishment or demonic possession, but the result of physical damage to brain tissue that controlled movement and consciousness. This medical explanation, while rational and based on observable evidence, created new problems for the royal family. If the prince's condition resulted from a childhood accident rather than divine intervention, it suggested that he was not specially chosen by the gods, but merely the victim of unfortunate circumstances. This interpretation threatened the religious foundation of royal authority and raised uncomfortable questions about the divine nature of the pharaoh's family. Moreover, Marcus's analysis indicated that the prince's condition would likely worsen over time as the brain damage caused progressive deterioration. The episodes might become more frequent and severe, and the physical stress of repeated muscular hypercontraction could eventually cause permanent disability or death. This prognosis was devastating for a family that had hoped the condition might resolve naturally as the prince matured. The Syrian physician's recommended treatment approach was as revolutionary as his diagnosis. Instead of relying on prayers and herbal remedies, Marcus proposed a regimen of controlled physical exercise designed to strengthen the prince's muscular control between episodes, combined with careful management of environmental triggers that seemed to precipitate attacks. Marcus had observed that bright lights, sudden loud noises, and certain aromatic substances consistently preceded the prince's episodes. He theorized that by gradually exposing Camwaset to these stimuli in controlled circumstances, it might be possible to reduce their triggering effect, similar to techniques he had used to help soldiers overcome battlefield trauma responses. The treatment program also included what Marcus called muscle education, exercises designed to help the prince recognize the early warning signs of approaching episodes and potentially abort them through specific breathing techniques and physical positioning. This approach represented a fundamental shift from passive acceptance of the condition to active management through patient education and behavioral modification. But perhaps most controversially, Marcus recommended that the prince be trained in techniques for minimizing harm during episodes that couldn't be prevented. This included removing dangerous objects from his environment, positioning soft materials to prevent injury during falls, and teaching palace staff how to safely restrain him without causing additional trauma. The implementation of Marcus's treatment program required overcoming significant resistance from traditional Egyptian medical authorities, who viewed the foreign approaches as potentially blasphemous challenges to established religious healing practices. Chief healer Amenhotep found himself caught between mounting pressure from the royal family to try anything that might help the prince and criticism from temple physicians who accused him of abandoning Egyptian medical wisdom for foreign superstitions. The decisive moment came when Prince Camwaset, working with Marcus to implement the new treatment protocols, experienced his first successfully managed episode. Using the breathing techniques and environmental controls that the Syrian physician had taught him, the prince was able to reduce what should have been a major convulsive episode to a relatively mild attack that lasted only a few minutes and caused no property damage or injuries. This breakthrough demonstrated that while the prince's condition couldn't be cured with ancient medical knowledge, it could be managed and controlled to a significant degree. The success of Marcus's approach vindicated his medical theories and provided hope that Prince Camwaset might be able to live a relatively normal life despite his neurological affliction. However, the political implications of accepting a foreign slave's medical diagnosis over traditional Egyptian healing practices created new complications for the royal court. If Marcus was correct about the physical nature of the prince's condition, it raised questions about other medical and religious beliefs that formed the foundation of Egyptian society. Palace officials worried about the precedent of privileging foreign knowledge over native wisdom, especially in matters affecting the royal family's divine status. The final chapter of Prince Camwaset's story reveals both the triumph of ancient medical observation and the tragic limitations of pre-scientific understanding. Under Marcus's careful supervision, the prince's condition stabilized significantly over the following 2 years. The frequency of major episodes decreased from several per month to occasional mild attacks that could often be managed without causing injury or public disruption. The treatment success came at a considerable cost to traditional Egyptian medical authority. Chief healer Amenhotep, despite his initial skepticism, became convinced of Marcus's approach and worked to integrate foreign surgical knowledge with Egyptian healing practices. This medical synthesis represented one of the earliest examples of international medical collaboration, though it generated significant controversy among conservative priests and physicians who viewed it as cultural contamination. Prince Camwaset's personal transformation during this period was remarkable. As his episodes became more manageable, his confidence returned, and he was able to resume many of the activities that had been suspended during the worst phases of his condition. He completed his education in scribal arts, military tactics, and religious ceremony, proving that his intellectual capabilities had never been affected by his neurological disorder. The prince's experience with his mysterious condition also fostered in him an unusual empathy for others suffering from unexplained illnesses. Palace records show that he became an advocate for improved medical treatment of palace staff and common citizens, supporting Marcus's efforts to establish what would be recognized today as one of the world's first specialized medical clinics for neurological disorders. However, the long-term prognosis that Marcus had predicted proved tragically accurate. As Prince Kaiwaset entered his late teens, the accumulated damage from years of violent muscular contractions began to manifest in chronic joint problems, muscular weakness, and coordination difficulties. The very condition that had once given him superhuman strength was gradually destroying his body's ability to function normally. The prince's awareness of his deteriorating condition influenced his decision about marriage and succession. Despite opportunities to marry into powerful noble families that would have strengthened his political position, Kaiwaset chose to remain celibate, fearing that his condition might be inherited by his children. This decision reflected both personal sacrifice and sophisticated understanding of hereditary illness that was remarkably advanced for ancient times. Modern medical analysis of the detailed records maintained by Marcus and chief healer Amenhotep suggests that Prince Kaiwaset suffered from a combination of severe epilepsy and dystonia, neurological conditions that can indeed cause episodes of abnormal muscular strength during seizures. The specific symptoms described in ancient sources match closely with modern case studies of patients who have similar brain injuries affecting the motor cortex and basal ganglia. The childhood head injury that Marcus identified as the probable cause would have been sufficient to create the type of neurological damage that produces both seizure activity and movement disorders. The delayed onset of symptoms, the progressive worsening over time, and the specific pattern of muscular involvement all correspond to what contemporary neurology would expect from such an injury. What makes the ancient Egyptian documentation of this case particularly valuable is the detailed description of treatment approaches and their relative effectiveness. Marcus's techniques, while primitive by modern standards, included elements that remain part of contemporary epilepsy management: environmental trigger identification, stress reduction, breathing exercises, and protective positioning during seizures. The case of Prince Kaiwaset ultimately demonstrates both the remarkable observational skills of ancient physicians and the fundamental limitations imposed by lack of scientific understanding about brain function. The Egyptian court's ability to maintain detailed medical records, implement systematic treatment approaches, and adapt to new knowledge from foreign sources represented sophisticated medical practice for the 13th century before Christ. The prince's condition also illustrates the complex relationship between medicine and politics in ancient societies. The need to maintain royal divine authority, while acknowledging medical reality, created tensions that influenced how the case was documented, treated, and remembered by subsequent generations. Official records emphasize divine favor and successful management, while minimizing details that might suggest weakness or mortality in the royal family. Perhaps most significantly, Prince Kaiwaset's story reveals the universal human struggle to understand and cope with neurological disorders that seem to transform familiar individuals into strangers to themselves and their loved ones. The fear, confusion, and desperate search for explanations documented in ancient sources reflect emotions that families still experience today when confronting similar conditions. The prince lived to age 26, a remarkable lifespan considering the severity of his condition and the limited medical knowledge available for treatment. His final years were marked by increasing disability, but also by significant contributions to Egyptian medical knowledge and administrative reform. He established protocols for treating palace staff with neurological conditions and supported the training of physicians in techniques derived from Marcus's surgical expertise. Prince Kaiwaset's death was attributed to complications from a particularly severe episode that caused what Marcus described as exhaustion of the heart muscle. Modern medicine would recognize this as cardiac arrest, resulting from the extreme physical stress of prolonged seizure activity, a known risk factor for patients with severe epilepsy. The legacy of the prince's medical case extended far beyond his individual story. The detailed documentation maintained by palace physicians provided a foundation for understanding neurological disorders that influenced Egyptian medical practice for centuries. The integration of foreign surgical knowledge with traditional healing approaches established precedents for medical collaboration that would benefit countless future patients. More broadly, the case demonstrates that ancient civilizations possessed far more sophisticated medical observational capabilities than is often appreciated. While they lacked the scientific framework to fully understand neurological conditions, Egyptian physicians could document symptoms, track treatment effectiveness, and adapt their approaches based on empirical evidence in ways that anticipated modern clinical practice. Today, Prince Kemwaset would be diagnosed with post-traumatic epilepsy with dystonic features, conditions that remain challenging to treat even with contemporary medical technology. His story reminds us that behind every medical mystery lies a human being struggling to maintain dignity and purpose, despite circumstances beyond their control, a truth that transcends the boundaries of time and culture. What do you think about this incredible case that puzzled ancient Egypt's greatest minds? Have you ever wondered what other medical mysteries from history might have simple explanations that weren't available to physicians of their time? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more fascinating stories from the ancient world that challenge everything we think we know about the past.